My heart thumped in my throat. It was number 409, not mine, but definitely for me. The recorder lay on the stairwell table where neighbors abandon umbrellas, flyers, and sometimes luck. I pressed play. A man's voice, steady in the way a person becomes after running out of excuses, said, "If you found this, time is up. Listen if you're afraid to change your life." The words touched a hinge inside my chest that had been rusting into patience. The bulb overhead hummed and flickered, washing the plastic in a lighthouse sort of light, and for a moment the narrow stairwell felt like a harbor I had drifted into by mistake and also on purpose. The recording continued. "Don't listen between floors. Take this to apartment 409. Knock once, then wait. If you keep waiting for perfect, you'll be late to yourself." There was no signature, only the small authority of someone who had practiced doubt long enough to recognize a different instrument. I had groceries sweating through their paper, milk, bread, cheap soup, an apple that wanted to be better, and a deadline on my phone that bristled with exclamation points. I also had the familiar appetite for postponement, the skill of saying tomorrow to anything that asked for sincerity today. Still, there it was. Time is up. The phrase did not threaten. It invited. I climbed, step by hollow step, the rail tattooing a line of cold into my palm. The fourth floor stretched like a breath held too long. Apartment numbers shone like coins pressed into old paint. My key belonged to 407. The recorder clicked again, softer, almost conspiratorial. "Touch the 409 on the door and count to 10. I smiled at the childishness and obeyed anyway. On 10, the door opened. A woman with storm cloud hair and a sweater mended with precise stitches looked me over as if my outline had been predicted in her margins. "Good," she said. "You're not early. Early people are still trying to bargain with fear." She lifted a second recorder, its face labeled 409 in thick black ink. "I'm Marta. 3 months ago, someone pressed play here and I didn't die. Come in." The apartment smelled like tea and paper with a map's memory of rain. On the wall hung maps with their roads erased. Cities floated like islands waiting for wind. On the table lay a notebook open to a page that read in block letters, "If you're tired of your version of good reasons, sit." I sat because my legs had already agreed without consulting me. Marta pressed play on her device. The same man, or his careful twin, spoke again, thinner now, as if recorded from the next room. "If you're listening in 409, the experiment continues. We chose this number because 400 is a crowd, and 9 is the extra you add when you mean it. I don't know your name. Good. I only know the fear you feed and the hunger you keep in respectable drawers. Today you stop mistaking certainty for care." She poured coffee into a chipped mug whose flaw made the cup seem particularly faithful. "I won't recruit you," she said. "You'll do it or you won't. The tapes helped me start. They won't push you. They'll point." The recorder resumed. "There's a key under the 3rd floor mat. It opens the storage cage behind the laundry room. Inside, you'll find a blue suitcase with stickers from places you haven't let yourself desire. Carry it to Central Station and put it in locker 19 before sunset. Don't look inside until you decide. If you can't decide, change your route. Fear respects geometry. Surprise it." I asked what happened if I refused. "Then nothing happens," Marta said, "which is the scariest thing." I tucked the recorder into my coat and went to find the key. It waited exactly where a predictable imagination would hide it. The storage cage knew metallic loneliness. Old chairs sulked, and a bicycle ghosted under dust. The blue suitcase stood ready, its handle wrapped in cloth like a hand tired of blisters. It weighed like books or stones, purpose more than content. I carried it into the honest weather of afternoon and took a different route than the one my habits hired. I followed the river where dogs introduced their people to possibility. I didn't check my phone at red lights. The station crouched ahead, grand and resigned. Locker 19 needed 2 tries. The door accepted the suitcase with a grunt. I closed it and sat on a bench to decide whether to betray the instruction and look. Choice, I learned, gets skittish when stared at directly. I opened the case. Inside was the opposite of contraband. Things chosen by someone who believed objects could be verbs. A pair of walking shoes scuffed at the toes, a folded paper with the words, "Your composition," written like a teacher's joke, a packet of seeds labeled "Starflower," a neat stack of plot blank postcards tied with twine, and a tape recorder identical to the Stairwell Orphan but marked 410. There was also a letter with my name. I traced the letters as you touch a face you have been afraid to recognize. The letter said, "You do not have to leave to change. You might. First, compose a day. Don't recycle one. Pick 3 new verbs and let them push you. Then, if staying can hold your new weight, stay. If not, take the weight with you." The words felt like a coat that would fit once I stopped hunching. I pocketed the seeds and the 410 recorder, returned the suitcase to its locker, and carried the note back to 409. Dusk put its thumb on the city's dimmer switch. Marta opened before I knocked, fearless lights waiting on welcome. We played the new tape. "If you're listening, the city agreed to help," the voice said. "Commit to a composition. 3 verbs. Don't choose soft ones. Watch how even your chair obeys."
"Return, confess, begin," Marta said when the beep arrived. I went back where I left badly. I told the truth in 3 sentences to someone I had been feeding crumbs, and I began cooking breakfast for myself like company. She lifted one eyebrow. "You?" "Grow," I said, thinking of the seeds. "Invite," I added, because fear builds castles for one. "Refuse," I finished, and felt the word lay down new law. I wrote them in the notebook. The pen made a small animal noise. The next morning, I filled the long-neglected planters on my fire escape and planted the starflowers. The soil smelled like advice and old rain. I invited Mr. Rahman, my upstairs neighbor, to coffee by calling his name into the stairwell. He said yes like a man who had been waiting in good humor for the bus and finally saw it come around the corner. We talked in a grammar made of cardamom and weather and the ordinary bravery of people who put on clean shirts for difficult days. Refuse proved hardest. I refused the meeting whose only product was a tired version of importance. I refused the posture that rehearsed apologies to furniture. I refused the habit of composing my next sentence while someone else was still lending me theirs. Each refusal made a small corridor in the day where air could pass and decisions could stand without leaning on a wall. Tape 411 told me to stand at a shop window and guess where strangers put their fear at night. I cried a little, and nothing broke. 412 asked me to call the friend I kept meaning to miss and say the single true thing I never picked up. We rebuilt the bridge with names and the kind of silence that holds rather than punishes. 413 sent me to the last stop on the eastbound line to mail a postcard to the person I would be if I kept going. I wrote, "Keep watering what looks like waiting." Some days were stubbornly small. The plants sprouted a green insistence. Tender spokes pushed through the soil like shy declarations. Each Friday, I mailed myself a postcard with 3 verbs I had attempted, brand new or repeats, but with better posture. The mailman winked and asked if I was making a collection. I said, "A life." When the tapes did not conjure miracles, no job disguised as destiny, no stranger with a golden key, I almost quit and asked for my old certainty back. Marta brought soup that tasted like continuing. "The tapes aren't oracles," she said. "They're mirrors with nicer lighting." Tape 414 trembled. "If you're still with me," the voice said, "enter 409 at 7, open the middle drawer, and read what you find out loud. Don't read alone. Fear loves empty rooms." Inside the drawer lay a single page. "I grant you permission to disappoint your fear." I read it. Mr. Rahman, whom I had invited, nodded as if sealing a quiet treaty. "And I witness it," he said, and put one careful hand on my shoulder like a period that refuses to cage the sentence. Nothing exploded, everything stretched. I started taking walks without a destination until the city began to feel like a book you can open anywhere and still be reading in order. I learned how to salt water so pasta remembers who it is. I stopped rehearsing my half of conversations. I scheduled less and noticed more. I was late to nothing that mattered and early to listening. Tape 415 departed from the script. Marta pressed play and a woman's voice began. Hers, earlier, frightened but stubborn. "If you are me but later," past Marta asked, "tell me what tomorrow feels like." Present Marta laughed and cried at once. Gritty, but the good kind. 416 told me to write my resignation and put it in an envelope labeled "When I'm ready." I did. 417 asked me to take a stranger's photo with their own phone and say, "You look like you belong in your life." 418 told me to mend the hole in my pocket I kept losing change and decisions through. I sewed a crooked seam that held. 419 said, "Teach someone the smallest thing you know by heart." I taught Mr. Rahman the printer's tap that squares a stack of paper. He taught me how to set rice to steam without impatience and without measuring cups. At 420, the voice was almost gone. "Compose in public now," it whispered. "We've run out of tape. The rest depends on your verbs." The recorder clicked and settled into a dignified silence that sounded like trust. Days folded themselves into something new. I did not flee my life in a noble blaze. I became a person who moves furniture to where the light is. I still bought cheap soup, I added lemon, and did it on purpose. A month later, I used the envelope marked "When I'm ready" and left my job with a letter that did not apologize for arriving. Relief didn't crash over me like a wave. It seeped in like morning through thin curtains. I began to write postcards to strangers as well as to myself, each stamped with verbs and mailed to the world like invitations that did not require an RSVP. I keep the 410 recorder on my kitchen shelf. Once a week, I leave it on the stairwell table with a note that says, "For whoever decides the last safe place was never meant for a bed." People take it. Sometimes it returns with a new number taped to its side and a scuff that means it has learned another hallway. Sometimes a knock comes to 409 and Marta opens before the knuckles land. Fear hates interrupting kindness. We listen to nothing together, and it isn't empty. On the fire escape, starflowers lift small lanterns. When the wind leans on the building, the planters knock a rhythm that sounds like someone insisting gently from the other side of a door. I water in the early blue, and the city answers with sparrows and buses and the ordinary bravery it takes to leave for work or to leave work for something you have not named yet. Either way, the city keeps offering lockers and benches and windows that reflect versions of you haven't resigned yourself to. Time is up, the first voice warned. It was, for the kind of waiting that keeps you alive only on paper. If you found this, listen. If you're afraid to change your life, change a street, a chair, a verb. Carry a suitcase you don't yet recognize. Touch the number on the door and count to 10. Knock anyway. The door may open not because of magic, but because someone like Marta has been hoping you would finally arrive and decide to begin. Listen, if you're afraid to change your life, count to 10, knock anyway, and let the door that opens belong to you.